Tukua te wairua kia rere ki ngā taumata hei arahi i a tātou mahi. Me tā tātou whai i ngā tikanga a rātou mā. Kia mau, kia ita, kia kore ai e ngaro. Kia pupuri, kia whakamaua, kia tīna. Tīna. Uie, ai, kia. Kia ora koutou. It's lovely to have you here on this, hopefully, well, kei kirikiri roa ho. It's not looking so flash today, but it's a good day for a whole series of webinars. So this is Te Wahanga Tuarua, or Tēnei rā, and the kaupapa is Te Taha Wairua. So I'm ko Zane McCarthy taku ingoa, he kaiakoa hau, I roto i te kohanga reo o ngā kuaka. I'm an early childhood teacher at te kohanga reo o ngā kuaka in Kirikiriroa, Hamilton. I'm joined today by Dr. Rongo Ngata, who is going to talk to us about Te Taha Wairua and Matariki Te Tau Hou, and how we can prepare our tamariki mokopuna. Dr. Rongo Ngata is of Ngāti Porou, Scottish and Czech Bohemian descent. In 2016, he received a PhD from Massey University. His research was on kaupapa Māori study of the impact of matakite experiences on well-being. He spent nearly 10 years in California as a monk, studying Eastern and Western mystical traditions, and since his return to Aotearoa in 2003, has attended various wānanga learning about traditional Māori spirituality and learning his own Māori culture and language. He is currently a kaiarahi Māori at Te Rā Waldorf School and Raumati South Primary School on the Kapiti Coast. Kia ora, Rongo.
No, kia ora, Zane.
We're also joined by Lisa Johnston. She is a Te Reo Areare rep for Te Waipounamu within NZDI, and she works at Riverton Primary School in the bilingual unit. Lisa, tēnā koe. Once again, welcome to this webinar. It'll be running for 45 minutes. And got any questions, please do put them in the Q&A box, and we'll be answering as many of them as we can at the end of this. So yeah, I'll now pass over to Rongo to have your to share your thoughts on this kaupapa Te Taha Wairua. Kia ora.
Kia ora tātou. Āti hei mauri ora. Me mihi tuatahi ki te wāhi ngaro. Kia i o nui, i o roa, i o taketake, i o matangaro, i o matua kore, i o te tīmatanga ta whakamutunga a te rua o te Māori. Tuarua kia rātou, kua wheturangi tia. Rātou o ia whare o ia marae te motu. Haere, haere koutou katoa. Ahuri, te mihi, ia tātou, ngā kono hioro o rātou. Koutou, ngā kai whakahaere, koutou ngā kai kōrero i tēnei rā, te kaupapa kua whakaturia e NZEI, te riuroa tēnā koutou katoa. Wai tēnei, ko hikurangi te maunga ko Waiapu te awa ko Ngāti Porou te iwi. Ko te whānau karu ai te hapu, ko ngata te whānau, ko rongo i te kai tēnei, e mihi atu nei ki o koutou katoa. Rauranga tira mā tēnā tātou katoa. Kia ora everyone. My name is, down here at Te Rā Waldorf School and Raumati South, they call me Papa Rongo, not Koro Rongo yet. And yes, so an honour to talk about something it's always been very close to my heart is reviving our spiritual knowledge base, or at least contributing what I can to that revival. And of course, this is being approached in various ways by many people around the country. And so the aspect that I kind of felt called towards was doing research around matakite, the impact on our well-being, and especially, you know, having grown up with having certain experience happen spontaneously to me, and not having anyone that I could turn to, or only being lucky, you know, on a couple of occasions to find one or two people that I could turn to. but many others who have these kinds of experiences don't have anyone. And some of these experiences, these wairua experiences, can really rock your boat. Extremely powerful experiences. And if we don't have access to spiritual mentoring, then it becomes a mental health issue. It becomes a huge issue for people, and especially if we experience, if our boat is rocked by these experiences, if the only way we can make sense of these abnormal, they're outside of the norm experiences, in a world where biomedical frameworks dominate, then of course these experiences can be pathologized. So Dr. Richard Egan talks about how essential it is for spiritual well-being and a really solid spiritual education to be incorporated into our education system. And it's an issue of public health. That was certainly something for me growing up, not having had that cultural mentoring, access to that cultural mentoring. And so the first thing that kind of really hit me was when my great-grandmother, Heni Haere Ngata, she passed away. When I was 10 years old, and we buried her at Taruheru in Gisborne, the Urupa in Gisborne, went back to our Pākehā grandparents' house, and we children were sitting in the middle of the living room floor, and then my vision just blacked out, and I couldn't see anything, and I could hear everything, and then all I could see was I could just see my great grandmother, just that kind of angle in the blackness, just there. She looked the age she was when she had passed away, but she was just radiating this vitality and this purple violet light. So I was inspired. I was crying, Nana, Nana, I can see you. And at the same time, I'd heard some of my uncles, poo-hooing this kind of thing, because my Pākehā grandmother was a matakite as well. So while being inspired and seeing my Nana, at the same time, I was trying to shut it down. Don't cause attention to yourself. Shut it down. This is embarrassing. And it was a Scotsman. It was a Scotsman, a family friend who walked in the room. And he had what they call the fae in Scotland, the fae. The same root word for fairy, the fae. And that's the spiritual sight. He walked in the room and he could see, and he said, no, boy, you relax. She's there, you're okay. And I had just having permission from one adult, for me to just relax into that experience. It made such a huge difference. And so that question always kind of stuck with me around how someone can be affected if they don't have access to some kind of spiritual mentoring when these things occur. And if we were essentially wairua beings, then at some point, something like this is going to emerge in our lives. And so with the Tōhunga Suppression Act, of course, that just decapitated a lot of our knowledge. And so even though it was repealed back in the 60s, the damage has been done. And I think, for me personally, I think a positive, actually proactive support needs to come from the government to help rebuild and repair the damage that was done. And, but what does it look like? And I think that's the great question. What would a spiritual education look like? And I think that these are criteria that really need to be fleshed out. They, in my opinion, are very, very easily can be fleshed out and identified, and they're distinctively different from other aspects of the whare tapawhā. I think, of course, we need to be careful about boxing these aspects of our being into, or separating them into discrete boxes. They all affect each other, of course. But I think within education, there's a huge amount we could be doing to raise our children with a certain degree of spiritual education, spiritual knowledge, and that baseline within our communities, within our society, has sunk pretty low with material Western society kind of dominating everything. And so, you know, I tend to think of our nature as wairua, essentially wairua. We are essentially wairua, and we need to be creating opportunities for our children, for our people to experience that truth, that reality. And so when we, for example, when I presented to the mental health review panel, I talked about this image of a maunga covered in snow, and the mental health system is asking, what are we missing? What are we missing? Suicide rates are still going up. Mental illness rates are still going up. And I proposed the idea that what we're missing is actually something really huge. But we're looking past it because we don't know what to look for. And that is that we are living in a spiritual famine. And we are like this maunga covered in snow, obsessing about retaining the purity of the snow, measuring the snow, quantifying the snow. But the snow's nature is unstable. It comes and goes with every little storm. So the snow's nature is going to melt. It's going to disappear and then come back again. And if we're identified only with the snow, then we have built a personality structure on something that is impermanent and fragile. And that's where, for example, our pepeha, education about our pepeha, developing our identity with our pepeha, can create a deeper sense of resilience. Ko hikurangi ko au ko hikurangi. I am hikurangi. I am my mountain, and my mountain is me. I am my awa, and my awa is me. And this is part of my identity. So I'm the mountain under the snow. I'm not the snow. Snow is just a tiny, tiny aspect of our being that comes and goes. And so even just learning about pepeha has implications for wairua education, for developing a resilience of identity that can go through weather the storms of life. So, you know, not having that education, that access to a spiritual education, this is what drove me into a monastery over in America, and studying different mystical traditions, meditation methods, and that opened up the door for certain other experiences as well that started unlocking some of our pūrākau for me, so, you know, I became very interested in understanding, unlocking, retelling our pūrākau from an esoteric perspective, from a mystical perspective. And again, different people have been very generous with their knowledge over the years. So I've got to acknowledge my mentors and people like Koka Rose, Pere, people like Professor Keretiro Tangata in the Waikato, people like my uncles and aunties now that I've been able to meet and have, you know, wonderful conversations with, people like Matua Billy Tuhua from Waima, so and many others. And so it's really encouraging to see how many ways different people are reviving our spiritual knowledge. I would love to see it happening in a really a much more wider, coordinated way. As far as the implications for education, and I've been asked to talk about taha wairua within education. Man, I could talk all day about this. So, some years ago when I was doing my PhD, there was a report by New Zealand Health Promoting Schools, National Strategic Framework, and it was an executive report. They talked about, and recognized wairuatanga. And these days now, even on the Ministry of Education website, any reference to wairua, it's been, as a part of wellbeing, it's been reduced now to health and physical education online kōrero. And I struggle to find any reference to wairua. And I think maybe that's also an indication of how challenging it is for some to really identify the criteria and distinctively different criteria that don't fit into any of the other categories. Taha, tinana, whānau, hine ngaro, those kinds of things. And so I think though that's also, a challenge around how difficult it is for us when we're trained in certain disciplines to not ask certain questions. And that's why we need people who think really differently, or who are practitioners of spiritual traditions, who may be within academia as well or outside of academia. But I think it's really important for people who are we need to be hearing from more than just the same people we hear from again and again. Taha hine ngaro, for example, although it's, these days in relation to whare tapawhā, that it is feelings and thoughts, refers to the psychological aspect of the person. Hine ngaro in our whare wānanga, very different thing. It's a profound state of consciousness, of pure awareness, absolute stillness. And this is beyond the kind of the busyness of thoughts and the busyness of mind stuff. It's a state of pure, still awareness. Hine ngaro. So Matua Māori Marsden talks about deep consciousness. This exists, and it's in the whakapapa above whakaaro, the focused mind, the individualized mind. So hine ngaro is a completely different state from in our as understood in our wānanga. It's a very different thing, and so I think we need to be hearing from people who can teach about hine ngaro from that perspective, from the whare wānanga. So we don't lose the beauty of these concepts of someone who's had an experience and named it a certain way and added it to our karakia, just as people have had a grasp of io nui, io roa, io taketaka, io matangaro. These are names of our Creator. They're also attempts to describe an experience that someone has had of that ultimate reality. And they've added it to that wānanga over time. So I think we need to not just be learning these karakia and learning about our spiritual traditions from an intellectual perspective and learning about hine ngaro, learning about io, learning about the different spiritual knowledge. But we also need to be creating the opportunity for us to experience that truth, experience that reality for ourselves. And that's because ideas can be displaced by other ideas. You can't displace an experience. When someone's had an experience of Mauri, they know it. They know it in their bones what it is. You can't confuse them with clever arguments anymore. And so, for example, when one of the songs we teach, and this is from Professor Keretiro Tangata's the wānanga He Tuatoatanga. There's a beautiful song. It's called Te Pū Kotahitanga. Te Pū Kotahitanga, the experience of absolute unity, and it starts off with this build-up. O ai, o continues to kotahi, pu kotahi, te pu kotahitanga. And we take the children through this through this chant. We'll be doing it just coming up for our Matariki festivals. And it goes into this song, but it's the whole song resonates with these vowel sounds. And that's the beauty of our reo as well. Has a lot of sonic power to it because of the vowels. And then we go through this song about this state of unity and then bring it back down from te pu kotahitanga. Te pu kotahitanga. And then bring it back down to pu kotahi, kotahi, oai, and then we drop the children into silence. And it's a beautiful exercise because we just drop the children into silence, and then I wait for a little bit, and then I ask them, who can feel the song still going inside them? Because we've been doing this for some minutes, and the children put their hand up. Where do you feel it? And see one girl goes like this. And what does it feel like? It feels like sparkling peace, tingly feeling, you know. And then they have an experience of Modi. Other kids they talk about, they experience it in their heart, or they can hear the song still rotating, or they can feel it in their feet. So it manifests in different ways for different people. But then the children, it's such a special experience for the children to actually connect and experience their life force being moved and being activated by sound. And it's a sacred moment. And that's the kind of thing that I would really love for our children, all our children, to grow up with, having experiences like this where they are able to get in tune and get to know their own life force, and to use that as an internal compass that guides them through life as well. It's very easy to get confused. There's a lot of competing arguments and for this and that around the world. And it's easy to get confused. Can't confuse life force. And so just giving the children an experience of an aspect of their being that is not just their physical being. Another way we do that with the children is to teach them, for example, a tohi karakia. So in class 7 at Te Rā, we teach them about a tohi rites. Tohi karakia have all these concepts, stunning concepts. So I rangahaua koe I te pō uri I te pō tangotango. I rakaitia koe ki te piki kōtuku te rau o te toro a te hui a titama. So you were formed, you were woven, your essence was formed in te pō. And at that point, you were adorned with these gifts, these aspects that are being described here as te piki kōtuku, the crest feather of the piki, of the kōtuku, te rau o te toroa, the glistening feathers of these birds. And so I teach them the karakia, I teach them about the karakia. We engage with an art project around the concepts. He pauhihi ko paurarama, a dynamically fiery pillar of energy. And I tell the children, remember, you're drawing yourself. And then I ask them questions around, what kind of paurarama, a dynamic, blazing, fiery pillar, ever woke up in the morning and worried about how popular it was, or the zit on its nose. And so the sun never worries about these kinds of things. The sun just gets up and just does its thing, just radiates its power no matter what's happening on Earth. And then at the end of the year, we do a tohi ceremony for the children as well. And so there are ways to kind of engage with our spiritual knowledge base, where they intellectually learn these things, but they also artistically engage with these concepts, but also that they experience a ceremony, and that it just starts giving them knowledge that they might be able to use if they have an experience. I've seen a man who was in a wānanga who experienced this po hihi ko Paurarama, this dynamic thing happening. Huge man, tall man, and he was it was in a healing session, and he was just sweating profusely, standing there, he had his eyes closed, and I asked him later on what was going on for him, and he said he couldn't hear a thing. All he could hear was a roar of blazing fire, and inside his eyes open, eyes closed, all he could see was this flaming energy. And so, yeah, that'd freak you out if you don't have some kind of frame of reference to understand that experience. And so that's why I think we need to be really, in a very organized way, passing on this knowledge, teaching our children about karakia, retraining, really opening up our karakia wānanga. And that's a tohi karakia. So that tohi was given to me by Kereti Rautangata Senior. That was given to him by Koropaki Harrison. But it's very similar to the karakia that's in the beginning of the Taki Timu book by Mitira. Let me see. Zane, how much time do we have?
We might need to move on to the Q&A soon.
Ka pai. I'll just wrap up quickly. I think, gosh. Yeah, hine ngaro. We need to develop a sense of stillness, get used to silence, get used to stillness. And when we usually, sit down and get still, we become aware of just how busy our minds are, and we think, the meditation or sitting or that stillness doesn't work. But it's simply because the muddy water is still stirred up. When we sit still enough, long enough, the sediment settles and then things start clearing up. But we need to be able to sit through that and get used to that and have someone train us how to do that. And another aspect also, how do we take care of ourselves, develop our taha wairua? And another one from another uncle, we don't just pray to some distant, unseen God in an antiseptic corner of the cosmos somewhere. Wairua is right here, right now. I am Wairua. Everything is Wairua. Everything, all physical creation is a condensation of Wairua. It's just a condensed form of Wairua. And so we need to train ourselves to see ourselves again as Wairua, as swimming in Wairua, as made of Wairua. And in that sense also, don't just thank God for our kai, thank the kai. My uncle Mokena, thank the kai. Talk to the ngahere, talk to Tāne, talk to the ocean. Teach our children, teach karakia to our children, that train them to think of them that way. And then that has an impact when our identity is forged with our environment as a part of our identity. It changes the way we behave towards our environment. It changes the way we behave towards others. Ko tāko manawa, ko tō manawa. These are concepts in our karakia. My being is your being. My heart is your heart. My essence is your essence. That has profound effects on how we are towards each other, how we are towards our environment. And so I think if we nurture a sense of connection that deep, I think that has implications for everything, for policy, for everything around what we do to the world around us. My uncle Mokena, he talks about, don't worry about looking crazy if you're the one that's talking to nature and talking to everything. All kinds of corporations rape the ocean and the land, and then they might judge us as being crazy for talking to nature. But actually, the madness is, and I think most of us get this anyway, but the madness is actually just destroying our environment in that way. And again, purea nei te hau, seek out those special places that uplift our well-being. See, I'm just quickly to finish up. and to just for us to explore the methods our tipuna use to enter into stillness, to enter into that state of expanded connection. And I think that's the next step. We have just stunning references to these experiences within our karakia, within our mātauranga Māori, but what's missing is the techniques, it's the methods of how to actually stimulate that experience for us. And I think that's the next focus that we need to have for our wānanga. Ai, me mutu mōna e nei, hoa tu te rākau ki a koe e Zane, ki a koutou katoa, tēnā koutou.
Ngā mihi ki a koe mō tō kōrero. So I'll pass on to Lisa. Did you want to share any thoughts or reflections? Any pātai?
Lisa.
Kia ora rongo. I've really enjoyed your kōrero this morning, and a few things sort of resonated with me. The whole mati kite and their impact on our well-being and the importance of that for a tamariki Māori. Not just that, but all tamariki within our schools. And you were really right. So if these children have these wairua experiences, they can rock their boat and don't know how to deal with them. So for us as educators, being able to understand about spiritual well-being and have that guidance in our curriculum and that time in our curriculum to be able to teach that. I really enjoyed your idea of developing students' pepeha and actually allowing them to understand where they come from so they can connect back to all of those things and their whānau and their whakapapa. The whole part around how Māori being activated through sound, that sort of hit quite big with everyone that's been on here and wanting to know about that waiata and how we can teach that, and actually how these waiata can be easily incorporated into our kura every day, karakia every day. So going right back to teaching those and the importance is a bit of a highlight. And through all schools in New Zealand, we can do that. So there's time for that all the time. But you're really right that we do need support from the government to get this done. And it's actually really important. The other thing that I liked is your whole silence and stillness. And I know for myself that when things get a wee bit too much, I go to the beach and stand in the awa, stand in the moana and just have that time to myself to reflect and clear my mind. So that's quite important. So yeah, lots come through. Great kōrero.
Kia ora, Lisa. Yeah, our atua, they're all in elemental beings. And so when Koro Paki talked about, Paki Harrison talked about, Tangaroa isn't the atua of the ocean, Tangaroa is the ocean. Tāne isn't the atua of the ngahiri, Tāne is the ngahiri. And there is a consciousness, there is an intelligent consciousness within all of these elements. And so, it's our knowledge is just kind of, a lot of it's hidden in plain sight. So that waiata, purea nei e te hau, horoia e te ua. So we teach our children, seek out those places in the environment that change how you feel, that uplift you. And that's different for different people. Oh, kia ora tata.
Kia ora.
Kia ora, Lisa.
Okay, so we've had some questions come through. We'll move on to the Q&A session. So the first one here is, what is the Māori worldview on the origin of a person's wairua? Te ira tangata or te ira atua, or both?
Yeah, both, in my opinion. Everything emerges out of Dao Wairua. So if we think about Wairua, some people talk about Wairua as like the second water, and that you're referring to the spiritual thing. I think that's actually back to front, in my opinion. I think if everything emerges out of Wairua, then that should be Waitahi. It's named Waitahi, the very first water. So I think Wairua, when people break Wairua in that way, I think it can be helpful, really helpful in some ways, and also a bit confusing in other ways. We talk about I o te rua o te mauri, te rua, the repository of life force. I think about Wairua also maybe, the repository of that fundamental element of life. and te rua o te wai. And so if we think about wai in a sense of different states of vibration, steam, water, and ice, it's essentially the same thing, just at a different rate of vibration. And so I don't think we can actually separate into taha wairua and taha tinana to the point where wairua is excluded from the physical realm. But I think as far as what I've been taught is that everything emerges out of wairua, and everything is wairua.
Another question. How do we nurture tamariki to feel without there being a stigma and it's separating them from their peers?
I think we've got to normalize it. But we have stories like Whaia Robin Kahukiwa's book around matatuhi. We just need to normalize it and put that into our children's stories, just into the environment, so that we just absorb this knowledge as we're growing up.
Are you aware of any references anywhere of how Māori used breathing and meditation techniques in the past as a self-regulation tool?
Yeah, good question. I think that's where a lot of our techniques, I think, have been lost or are yet to be recovered. I know some people are reviving them. So yes, I am aware at this point of some people who are doing that work. I don't currently have permission to make that public. I'll definitely take that question back to them and ask them. It's a tricky situation. We're just recovering from damage. We're trying to make sure that that this knowledge is revived and intact and secure, and doesn't just get stolen and co-opted elsewhere. But there are different references to it in the karakia. There are all kinds of references to, and even the karakia whakataka te hau. It's, in my opinion, also, this is one of the things where absolutely it applies to our environment. But based on what I've experienced, every aspect of that karakia could equally apply to an inner experience, and resulting in that state, he ho-hu, and absolute still wind after a fallen snow. The place is just blanketed in silence, and that is also an internal experience. Hinengaro, when we actually fully enter into Hinengaro, we enter into this perfect stillness of consciousness, and you can see thoughts are like waves on the ocean, but they're just little waves on this oceanic state of being. And so these concepts and experiences are within. So the ho-hu, the still, absolute, perfectly still breath. They're there in our karakia. They're there in our knowledge.
So you mentioned that there were definite criteria that defined a spiritual education. This attendee is asking if you could specify what they are, especially in the earliest years.
Especially in the earliest years. Oh, well, I think, we're looking at outcomes of a spiritual education. So, but I think this has been a struggle with people, how to identify the criteria that are distinctively different. But instead of, a stronger sense of cultural identity has been proposed as one. But I think, a lot of our tipuna were quite solid in their cultural identity prior to colonization. But I don't think that means everyone was fully plugged in spiritually. So I think, things like less fear of death, a greater sense of connection with the environment, a greater sense of connection with one's ancestors, a greater sense of connection with Io, a greater sense of resilience to weather the storms of life, a greater sense of connection with a part of us that we believe will endure beyond physical death. And so I think, when one sees or experiences themselves in a way that positions the personality, the physical body, the mind, the ideas, the concepts about ourselves, those aspects of ourselves are kind of like the tip of your little finger on the whole being of you. And so what happens to that tends not to dominate your whole experience when your sense of identity is much greater than that. With the children, I think we just need to normalize these things and talk about some of these things. Children get it. And I don't think I think our challenge is just how to talk about these things in the simplest way and the most natural and normal way possible. We can make them a lot more complicated than they need to be. But that's the thing, we teach them in songs, so they just inherit these experiences and inherit this knowledge, kind of by osmosis. And it's different from religious training. Religion can help, but religion, religare, it means to bind oneself to a certain code of behavior that you hope will create these experiences. But the binding can also become a prison if it's used wrongly. Kia ora tātou.
So we have to the end of our time. I'm sorry we couldn't get to everyone's questions, but yeah, you've given us a lot of food for thought. And
Kia ora. I would love for for people to really, for us to develop this into a much bigger kind of forum for discussion.
And I hope that everyone can take what they've learned, what they've heard here, and apply it to your context and your settings, and like really celebrate and acknowledge te wairuatanga o ngā tamariki katoa. So ngā mihi ki a koe, Dr. Rongo, o tōku horero, ki a koe hoki, Lisa. And to everyone who has joined us on this webinar, thank you for attending. Our next webinar will be at 1:00. Hope you can all join us then. And I will now close with karakia.
Kia ora, Zane. Kia ora tātou katoa.
Kia tau ngā manaakitanga a te mea ngaro. Ki runga ki tēnā o tātou. Kia mahea te hua mā kihikihi. Kia toi te kupu, toi te mana, toi te aroha, toi te reo Māori. Tūturu whakamaua kia tīna. Tīna. Haumie, huie, taiki.
Taiki e. Kia ora. Kia ora.
Taki te koutou.